This is the Conrad Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios, throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
Oh, for 5 years. 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you live from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, broadcasting via the auditory and visual mediums to my fellow delinquents across the globe. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim. Today is November the 7th, 2024, and this is episode 474 of Workshop Radio. How in the world are all my fellow delinquents out there? It's good to see you. It's good to be back, and it's good to be seen. Wow, has it been a busy week? I hope you guys have filled your week full of GSD, because all I can tell you is so have I. So let's open up with a rule to live by. I have a list of 34, and I continue to throw them into the old random number generator, just seeing which one will pop up. It's getting harder and harder to get the random number generator to bring me a number that works, but we still got a ways to go to get through this list. So this week's rule, number 15, the best way to find a solution to a problem is to start working on it. I had to learn this the hard way many years ago. Again, I go back to kind of that early 20s, early to mid 20s, just after Becky and I moved in together and shortly thereafter got married. For a lot of years, I would look at my dad and my grandfather before he passed away, how handy they were and how they could fix things. And I never really knew what the key was. And I realized eventually that you can suffer from analysis paralysis. You can sit back, you can try to figure out, well, where do I start? How do I tear this apart? How do I put it back together? What do I do if it won't go back together? What do I do if I don't have the right tool? Oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden you've spent 2 minutes, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 decades thinking about a problem that you thought, man, I should have tried to solve this a long time ago. And instead of working on it, you just sat around, twiddled your thumbs and worried about it. Well, guess what? I've discovered in my own way, and maybe this isn't the most ideal way, and maybe if some people have seen what I do, they might think, oh boy, I get why that is that way. But for me, building something, assembling something, siding something, whatever it happens to be, I know I don't know all the answers when I start, but I know I'll know a hell of a lot more answers when I get done. So for me, the easiest way to fix something is to start tearing it apart and see what in the world's going on and come up with a solution as I go. Because there's nothing quite like the desperation of needing to finish a project to help you come up with a solution for that project. So anyhow, it's great to see you folks. Before we go into our first segment of the evening, which is going to be Stranger Than Fiction, I wanted to give you, number one, take a look at the pinned comment tonight if you haven't heard yet. So if you're listening to this on audio, it's not going to affect you at all. If you're sitting down, enjoying an old fashioned like I am, then, watching me and having a grand old time for this week in prepping or workshop radio. Well, slight announcement here. Coming up on January 24th, 2025. Now, you might wonder, why in the world did he pick such a specific date? Well, I'm a sucker for numbers, and a few things are going to happen on that date. Number one, that's going to be the 5th anniversary of this podcast. Of the entire YouTube channel. It'll be 5 years ago on that day that I launched this YouTube channel by making an appearance, after canceling it the first time, on Living Free in Tennessee. So that's exciting. Also, that evening is going to be my 500th episode of Workshop Radio. How insane is that? 5th anniversary, 500th episode. And if everything goes well, we're going to be really, really close to 25,000 subscribers at that point as well. All that being said, I have worked really hard to make my content what I want it to be. And I toyed with the ideas of moving things around. I really didn't know. I knew that I have 2 great things going, guys. I knew that I have my review videos, which is the big moneymaker. And I knew that I had the podcast, which is my community, our community, all us crazy delinquents. And I've always said, if you want to find success in things, you really need to focus on them. And in YouTube especially, you really need a niche. And so I finally decided to pull the plug. I'm not canceling the podcast at all, but I decided for a few reasons that workshop here with the tool review videos, generator videos, that sort of thing is staying here. And workshop radio is moving to its own channel on YouTube. I've had at workshop radio on YouTube for maybe a year, maybe two now. Never told anybody about it. Just threw a few shorts up there. It's been a test channel for a while. So grab the link in the description tonight. It'll be the pinned comment, and I'll make sure it's there for everybody else. So please make sure you subscribe. I know it's a long way to say it, but you're going to get tired of hearing about this by then, because it's going to be like that time that they switched over from black and white to color television. Everybody had to pay attention. So we are going to be moving there in less than 3 months now. So anyway, it's great to have you folks back. I'm excited to be back. You can't see much left, but I've got green paint on my hands. It's been a get shit done day. We got the very first classroom. It used to be 3 rooms. Now it's 1. Anyway, we got 2 coats of paint on it, and it is finished as far as paint goes. I'm excited. So without any further ado, let's slide right in tonight.
If anyone dies while you are kept in your fallout room, move the body to another room in the house.
The time has come for Stranger Than Fiction. And here we are. We are back, and we are going to go straight into Stranger Than Fiction. And for those who haven't been here before, or you're new, or you're listening sometime in the future, Stranger Than Fiction is where we take our look at some of the strangest, oddest, or dare I say inspirational? I don't know. Anyway, news stories that really affect us as the prepared and minded folk. So a couple other quick things, just so you know. I am always trying to make this show just a little bit better. So I have implemented a teleprompter, which is kind of cool. I have this new teleprompter app, which floats over my face, which allows me to keep my eyes more on the screen. I've also moved the level of the camera up a little bit, always trying to make things just a little more professional for everybody out there. So, all right, first evening story I have for you. And before that, I want to shout out Ian. I see you out there. L2 Survive, Angie Marie, Ryan Pippin, and a bunch of other folks hanging around in the background. It's good to have you. Always love seeing you guys. First story. This comes from globalnews.ca. That is a Canadian news source. So I apologize for less than reliable news sources, but here, no, I'm just kidding. Elaborate village-like encampment with power, water, dismantled in South Edmonton. So South Edmonton is 2.5, 3 hours from where I am. I spend a lot of time there, and it has become a massive magnet for homeless people. It's kind of, I don't want to say sad, but my goodness. And I know it's the same story everywhere, folks, that there seems to be a massive increase in the homeless population everywhere. And I mean, Edmonton has the notoriety of being the coldest and farthest north city of 1 million people or more in North America. It is a miserable city to live in the wintertime. I couldn't imagine not having a home and living there. But these folks come up with some really great ideas. I would love. So I don't know what other people think about this. And I would love to sit down with a couple of people who spend a majority of their time on the street and just chat with them. First off, the episode there'd be no ads on that episode. It would be some way to help them, whatever it would happen to be, whether it's a GoFundMe or we share some links or whatever it happens to be. But honestly, I am blown away by the ingenuity of folks that have almost nothing in their lives, and they manage to find a place to stay warm, to stay fed, to stay dry. I'm impressed beyond belief. So check this story out here, guys, and tell me what you think about it. This one says elaborate village-like encampment with power and water. A complex homeless encampment complete with power and appliances. That blew me away right there. Anyway, in several structures has been, of course, dismantled by police in Southeast Edmonton after it was discovered last week. Edmonton Police Services said it was one of the most elaborate encampments officers have ever seen. It had a mini power grid including solar panels and multiple home appliances. That alone blew me out of the water. And the cop goes on to say I'm not impressed, that would be a lie. In a video posted to the force's social media, adding that the site was incredibly unique. So we're going to get into a little bit more about this, but there's maybe some lessons to be learned or some interesting insights. 5 people were living at the camp. Police were able to confirm when they arrived to the site last week. One said they'd been living there since last winter. So we're talking about 12 months, an entire year that this encampment was there. Now, you got to know, there's not a ton of trees in the Edmonton area. There's not any wooded, we just don't have forests like other places. Now, Edmonton does have more trees than where I live, but in order to hide, a 5-person multi-level encampment, not an easy factor. Keep going here. So if you guys can see this picture here, this is aerial footage of where the encampment was. You can't tell. It doesn't look any different than a bunch of scrub brush. Great pains were made to hide the little village from the outside world, police said in a social media post. It was in an industrial area. So there's the first thing I want to key in on. So number one, mostly industrial areas aren't going to be traveled in the evening. Mostly you have people coming and going to work. And as long as, homeless people don't, get up into their business, they're going to leave them alone. It's not like setting up next to a residential area where, a lady or a man or whatever happens to look out their window all the time and they see something and they call the cops. Typically, industrial areas are going to be, a little safer for folk like that. It was almost completely camouflaged. And get this, included 4 multi-level structures surrounded by a fence made of trees and broken branches. I think I would just turn my back and keep going. This reminds me a little bit of the lady that lived in the signage on top of a grocery store. Folk are desperate out there and they're trying to come up with some interesting ways to stay survived, as my good friends Cam and Colby say over on the Casual Preppers podcast. This blows me out of the water. And then, of course, the police always play it off as we're just looking out for their best interest. The fence included a wooden gate, and all the structures inside the compound were covered in tree branches. Power was supplied by 4 separate generators and solar panels. The police said the electricity powered a chop shop for stolen bikes that also contained welding equipment. So they were running, now this is where, you're getting into stealing other people's shit. So this is a problem, but they were running a chop shop. They had welding equipment that they were running off grid, and multi-level structures in this off-grid encampment that they managed to hide for a year plus. And then, of course, the cops said the structures had been built without nails or other forms of support and were at risk of collapse. That's always what they use. One bad gust of wind, one bad weather night, and that thing could have come down and crushed whoever it was inside. I'm just going to throw it out there that if it's light enough to fall over in one windstorm, there's a good chance it ain't going to crush somebody if it fell over. It looked like something, not this elaborate, but, we used to build a ton of camps when I was in, junior high and elementary school. And these look maybe like a slightly better version, or if I was a grown-up, what I would build. Inside the huts, officers and park rangers found wood-fired stoves with lit fires, an impressive stone fireplace, stone and marble flooring laid in an organized pattern, a working mini fridge and washing machine, and live electrical wires, police said, were strung haphazardly. So what does that tell me? These folks have hard skills. They know how to survive. They know how to wire. They know how to lay brick. They know how to install stoves. Either they don't want to live somewhere or they just can't and they've decided to make do. But what an interesting thing. I would have liked to have seen the encampment, I guess. Let's put it that way. All right, let's move on to the next story, guys. This one here comes from BangorDailyNews.com. And if you don't know, Bangor is the home to Stephen King. This is not an article about Stephen King, but that seems to be their biggest claim to fame is Bangor, Maine. So here it is. Bangor Daily News. They went off grid and back to the land in 1977, and they're still there. So that was one of the first back to the land movements. They, in the 60s, they coined the phrase retreater, and then it was back to lander and all of that. But either way, I thought this was an interesting look into one of the few couples that stuck around after the Back to the Land movement in the 1970s and how well they survived. Before we do that, I see Autumn Dawn in here. Great to have you. And Martinson family, also great to have you. Here we are. What a neat looking couple. He has a Santa Claus looking beard and she looks as happy as can be. When Linda and Cal Winter picked up their hand tools in 1977 to build a small house in the main hillside, the former academics didn't know what they were in for. And this story starts like a lot of other ones. You know, they were disenfranchised with the system. They were tired of being professors wherever they happened to be. They were worried about the world, and they decided, let's step away. They'd left their university careers and bought 75 acres to make a self-sufficient home without the reliance on foreign oil, supply chains, or the corporate world. And I'd have to say, they look like they were pretty successful. So this is, you know, for any of us or any of those out there who are thinking, I'd love to step out and live in the woods, live off grid, be a homesteader, which is great. I have no problem with that. But this is kind of the end game. This is where, you know, we're talking almost 50 years ago or almost 50 years later, and they are still at it. I love it. Bobby Spags Unfiltered. What's up? He says, good to see you, brother. And I knew you meant Tim. He put Yim up there, but it's fine. So they left the university. The two were among hundreds, maybe thousands, flocking to Maine in the 60s and the 70s to live closer to the earth as part of the Back to the Land movement. We've talked about it before. Many were influenced by books such as Living the Good Life by Maine homesteaders Helen and Scott Nearing. The newcomers were politically aware environmentalists with strong ideals and often little or no homesteading experience. Some call it the simple life, but it wasn't easy. Tatlebum, oh my goodness, these names are great. Tatlebum and Wiener were among the pioneers of Maine's modern homesteading movement. And unlike most of their peers, that's the big one, unlike most of their peers, they still live in their original home. So what that says is that most people are going to try and most people aren't going to stick with it. It's just like podcasting, content creation, entrepreneurship, whatever it is. The key is to just stick with it. If you want to succeed, if you want people to say, wow, what an overnight success, you got to stick with it for a decade or more before people are going to call you an overnight success. And that's what it is. Most people are going to give up long before that. You know, that first winter that they didn't get enough. Of course, I'm fictionalizing here, but that first winter that they didn't cut enough firewood and they had to burn green ash almost off the stump and deal with the soot and creosote and the lack of real good heat, that kind of stuff. And they stuck with it. And everybody else said, hey, you know what? That cushy job that I had at Princeton, you know, that position that was tenure, I think I might call my boss and see, hey, is it still good? Can I come back? I was just kidding, guys. But these guys didn't do that. Some called it the simple life, but it wasn't easy. And unlike most of their peers, they still live in their original home, mostly off-grid and mostly self-sufficiently. How cool is that? They didn't know how hard it would be, but in time, they added on to the house. They became early adopters of solar panels, grew almost all their own food, raised a child interested in computers on a limited power supply, of course. And they saw Tatlebum succeed as an author chronicling their experiences and her philosophies. So again, they learned, they lived, they experienced, and she did what a lot of people do. She wrote it down. Now, here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words that definitely sums up their success. I think we're just stubborn, she said. We like where we are. We like our home. We like the work. And so we keep doing it. My commitment to it was just because I love it. I love the land and I love Maine. But there it is right there, summed right up. If you want to be successful at whatever you do, if you want to look back in 50 years or 30 years or 40 years and think, damn, I did pretty good homesteading. Me and the missus, we succeeded. That's really the key right there. I think we're just stubborn. That's it. That's all there is to it. But yeah, so real cool. There's a lot of pictures here. You can see there's onions that they grew themselves. There's some of their, so there's one more little section here. I want to come down to their power, their energy system. And in 1981, it says in 1981, David Sleeper, if anybody's heard that name before, I haven't, but somebody I got to look up now. He was a pioneer in residential solar in Maine who electrified homes on Monhegan for the first time with panels. He arrived to their home unannounced in the middle of the night. That'd be grounds for getting shot. But anyway, He brought with him 4 35-watt panels. In 1981, that must have seemed like a lot of power. The couple still use them today, and that gives them enough electricity to run 2 light bulbs and a water pump. 40 years later, and they're still using those solar panels. The low wattage panels required wiring for direct DC power, which travels from batteries, and their entire home has cigarette lighter ports, unlike regular AC plugs. The systems were expensive, taking 3 decades to pay off. How many of their friends do you think bought a solar system and then gave up on it? Never saw the payoff. These guys are like, well, suckers, we got 10 years of free electricity now. People would save up to buy more over time, and now they have a small museum of solar technology. How cool is that? So over the 40 years, they bought new pieces all the time. They've kept it all in the system, and now their place resembles a solar-powered museum. I love it. They used a special efficiency refrigerator, rationed their power use, and sometimes ran out anyway. If their son had a friend over, they played downstairs because there wasn't enough power to keep a light on his room. When he got into computers, they tried to find ways to run one on a battery. Again, they were solutions-oriented. But overall, it's rare that you find someone who has been doing this as long as they have and are still absolutely in love with it. I love hearing it. You have to be stubborn to do it. All right, on to the next story, guys. I got a bunch for you tonight, and they're all good. This is a short one. This is from MSN.com, and it's an off-grid city, springs up in the middle of the desert, 150 miles from anywhere. Now, of course, it didn't just happen out of the blue. It happened because, again, somebody had passion. Now, we're going to get into this, and you might listen to this guy's idea for doing this, and you might think, I don't know. I'm not into that. But I just love the fact. Let's get into it. Instead of me yammering on top of it here. A tiny off-grid city is being built in the middle of the Arizona desert. The community of Costler Cove in Navajo County is set east of the tiny town of Snowflake in Arizona. Imagine having a name Snowflake in Arizona. If that's not an ironic name, I don't know what is. Despite its remoteness, the plan is for the 1,300-acre city to be unincorporated. Number one, I love hearing that because I'm going to guess unincorporated means building codes aren't a thing. Local bylaws aren't necessarily a thing. Taxation's probably pretty low. It's going to be completely off-grid and eventually 200 residents, all part of a garden farming community that'll be completely self-sustainable. Now, I love the idea. It sounds great. Whereas traditional land developers, now this is where, okay, here we go. Whereas traditional land developers are in business to maximize profits, or in other words, capitalism, which we're big fans of around here. The settlement of Costler Cove was set up by Philip Gleason in order to reduce the cost of living and stress of daily life. Now, great, no problem. I'm cool with that if you want to. It sounds like this is going to be a cooperative, but I'm guessing someone had to put the money in up front to buy this land. Those living off the land will also be able to grow food, which could later be sold at a co-op store on site. I like that idea. Or trade, anything like that. Or through commercial channels, which the founders claim to have with a suggestion that up to 6 figures could be made from their sale of the crops. I don't know. Anyway, it sounds like they're being a little optimistic there to start with, but I have no problem with that. Next month, in July, this is an older article, the community is holding an open day for those interested in taking a closer look at living off-grid. The settlement, anyway, it sits on top of an aquifer, which means there's tons of water there. And it's going to be a bit of a co-op. It's cool. I'm down with it. I'm okay with what they want to do. I don't know if I would necessarily want to be part of a co-op. I'm just a bit of a rugged individualist, and I like to own what I own. I like to live on my own land. I like to do that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't be part of a community like this. And everybody's definition of community is different. As long as it's voluntary, I have no problem what kind of community you want to be a part of. If you're consenting adults and you want to live under the constraints of communism, all the power to you. I don't call this communism, but just using that as an example. So anyway, they have shared water, which you can see where there's some water tanks here. There's some shared solar. They have a tool repository that everybody can share as well. It's pretty exciting. All right, let's take a look at who we got here. Lone Canadian says, Hopefully, Snowflake is an ironic name and not a description of the residents. I was hoping that myself. Jeff Stark says there's a town of Snowflake in southern Manitoba. More appropriately named, I think. I agree completely. And Hardway Alaska says, hey, Mr. Tim. Hello, Mr. Hardway Alaska. Good to see you. All right. I think I got 2 more stories here. We got quite a few. I got some good ones this week. This one comes from the Cool Down. Man, I find more good articles from this website than just about anywhere else. Now, this one's a little bit on the Nighthawk. Look at who's in here. Guys, we got to shoot out. He says, community equals imaginary internet friends. Ain't that the truth? Somebody's heard me say that once or twice. And speaking of community, a brother from another mother. Anyway, no, he is definitely community who is an imaginary internet friend from a long ways away, but not as far away as it used to be, at least whenever I'm at our property in Tennessee. Here we go. TheCooldown.com. This one is off-gridders share the first thing you need to know before cutting the cord. And it's not easy. Oh, and I didn't hang on, guys. We got a shout out local prepper too. Good to see you in here. Love my internet community, he says. Absolutely. All right. Do not go off grid. Are you ready for this? If your domestic partner is not 100% on board, I would say that would be a recipe for divorce. Definitely a recipe for divorce. So this is one of those articles where they sum up a Reddit post. So I don't have to go deep into it, but I wanted to share some people's thoughts of what they said. But the internet never hesitates to give a reality check to those in need. A Redditor recently discovered that after soft pitching the idea of going off grid, in a post in Off Grid, they said, when would you advise a friend not to go off grid? The Redditor, who seemingly contrite about their own experiences, they admitted that nobody considers me an expert at squat. You don't need to be an expert. You just need to know that you know stuff, you know? That's the idea. You don't have to master anything. I mean, it's nice to master something, but it's good to just know some shit and be willing to learn some shit. Simple as that. So they posted, they said, when would you tell somebody not to join, not to go off grid? Here's one here. Number 1, the one we talked about. Do not go off grid if your domestic partner is not 100% on board. Again, that would totally be a recipe for divorce. Here's another one. Build up to it, or you will just create a horrible living situation for yourself. Anybody ever heard of chicken math? My wife and I, we did chickens a couple different times, and chicken math happened all the time. But really what happened was somebody else would say, hey, I hear you have chickens. Do you want my chickens? They don't lay eggs, or I didn't realize it'd be so much work, or I want to travel, whatever it happened to be. They would simply say, do you want more chickens? And we would gladly take more chickens. And then we'd be in over our head. And so we replaced one other person's in over their headedness with our own in over our headedness. And what ends up happening is you grow, take. And eventually you're like, well, shit, I've created a horrible living situation for myself. So like they said, build up slow, start slow and go bigger as you go. How about this one? Start living there part-time and working your way into it gradually. They said you'll learn a lot and figure out how disconnected works for you. I grew up in a small town in Nova Scotia. There was an even smaller town a half an hour away on an island called Long Island, and not that Long Island, but a regular Long Island. And what would end up happening was folks would see this beautiful Bay of Fundy shore. They would go online and they would say, guess what? Land is cheap there. I can't believe it. And so they would buy it on the internet and they would move down and they would be retired professors. And the first thing they would bitch about is having to take a ferry to get to their land. And then they'd bitch that the closest Walmart was a 10-minute ferry ride and a half an hour's drive away. And then they would bitch that everything was too expensive in the little country store. And what ended up happening was they went balls to the wall right away, bought the land with no research, no time spent there. Or worse than that, maybe they went for 5 days and fell in love with it, but they were there, you know, during the nicest time of the year, whatever it happened to be. And boom, all of a sudden, well, shit, I'm stuck. My life sucks. I hate this. There was a couple who lived down in Troke Cove Road, where we live, down in Centerville, Digby Neck. And they had moved there from British Columbia, and they bought an old church. And with that old church behind it was also an old house. And they decided they were going to rebuild the church, rebuild the house. They had all these plans for the community. And once they get in there for a couple of years, they realized, holy shit, this is a lot of work. Everything costs 3 times as much. I'm 4 times as far, and I can't do this. And that's okay. So they sold and they moved away, took a loss, and they were happy. Hardway Alaska says, what if they say they want to go off grid, but they already complain now on grid, and you know you'll be doing 99.8% of all the work? I would say that might not be worth doing. Man, that sounds like a recipe for some domestic strife there. I'm just going to say that if Becky and I were going to do that, we would have to have a long, hard conversation about expectations and roles. It would be just, I know this sounds funny, and I guess we should be at that point with our spouses anyway, but it's almost like hiring somebody. You know, if you hire somebody and you're like, hey, I want you to do this, and you just have a verbal conversation about what their job is going to be. And then all of a sudden they sit down and they remember the conversation different than you do. And so they think, oh, this is my responsibilities, and they do them. And then you remember it differently and you think, wow, guess what? Oh, so I beat around the bush to say, get everything in writing, and not necessarily with your own family, but expectations have to be tempered. You need to sit down, you need to chat it, you need to hash it out, and you need to figure, what are we actually going to do? And I think you need to be honest, and you can be like, listen, I love the idea, but I can't do this. It's like when your kid comes and says, I want a dog, Dad. And you say, well, are you going to feed them? Absolutely. Well, you can only do your best to make sure they're going to do it, right? Chris Watkins, good to see you. Tim and everyone, how are you? I'm great. And Lone Canadian says, Digby, I'm probably not allowed back in that town. I'm going to guess that you were a new recruit who was at Cornwallis and used to go downtown Digby to the club and possibly get in fights with the local fishermen. I don't really know. I'm just kidding, but I'm guessing that might be why you're not allowed back in that town. I could be way off, but let me know, Lone Canadian, how close I am to there, because I definitely know some stories from my town. And as John Willis says, I married the wrong bee. Yep. Thank God I didn't marry the wrong woman. I'll tell you that. So it happens. And I'm sorry, Hardway, if you're, reflecting and sharing here. I apologize if that's the situation you're in. But again, we all find ourselves in situations we're in, and we have to deal with them where we're at. And I'd gladly chat some more with you over it. I'm no expert, but I can help you where I can help you. So, all right, one more quick story here, and then we're going to move into another segment. Lone Canadian says, way too close. You must be psychic. Next time you're down for coffee, Lone Canadian, we'll share some stories. Not that I was involved, but I had lots of family members that were. And Chris says the live you had with John was great. Thank you, brother. I could talk to John all day long. And so we are going to be having one every single month, the same Monday that we had. I believe it's the 4th Monday. I'll tell you for sure going forward. But yeah, anyway, here's a quick story. This one was fun. This comes from msn.com. And it says, Prepper shares little known hack for getting extra use out of expired instant ramen. I saved them for just that reason. So some people were saying that ramen noodles go old really fast and they taste stale. I just assumed that's how you're supposed to eat ramen noodles. I had no idea that they didn't just taste funny all the time. Anyway, so can you eat expired ramen noodles? Sure. Are they going to taste a little off? Sure. By the time you put the flavor packet on them that has, 4 weeks worth of your sodium daily intake in it, you're probably going to be okay. No, anyway. So this one here, I thought this was kind of a cool tip. Just because a prepackaged food is well past its expiration date doesn't mean it's no longer usable. One person shared a useful tip. They said, ramen expires fast, but the seasoning lasts. They explained in the title of their post, today I went through my big box of ramen from 2020. Imagine that. I'll bet they ran out, scared shitless like most folks were, and said, I need to buy whatever I could buy. And then it ended up sitting on a shelf for almost 5 years. Can you imagine? March 13th next year is going to be 5 years since all that bullshit started, hey? I went through my big box of ramen from 2020, swiped all the seasoning packets to use with my rice and beans. All the noodles were very stale smelling, but the seasoning is still fine. Hey, that's sort of like what Becky and I do. We stay a lot of nights in a lot of hotels, and we have 2 great big tough totes full of freebies from hotels over the years. We go through it periodically. But who knows? Wouldn't it be great if you were the last person in town to have coffee left because you had to open up all those little Keurig pods that you got from the hotels. We pay for it. We bring it home with us. I'm happy. We get takeout. You know, you go to Chinese food and you get all those little packets of soy sauce. They go into a package. You get forks and knives and straws and napkins. Everything we can save goes into packages, and we save it for later. We may never need it, but it is worst case scenario, and it's there. Simple as that. Save your packages out of ramen and use them for seasoning your rice and beans. And when you get tired of rice and beans, shake things up a little and have beans and rice instead. Ian says, my grandmother kept totes full of hotel soap, shampoos, and conditioners for decades. That shit don't go bad. You know, there might be a day when Becky and I are long gone and the kids have to clean the house out, and they'll be like, those crazy kids, not kids really, but you know, they'll want to say, why did they keep so much? But you know what? There also could be a day like when COVID happened that two different people in our family came to us for toilet paper. Simple as that. They needed toilet paper. There wasn't any toilet paper. We had toilet paper. I needed a Christmas tree. We didn't have a Christmas tree, so I solved the problem. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a little early to be quoting Clark W. Griswold, folks, but there it was for anybody who caught it. So yeah, there's the end of Stranger Than Fiction. I always love that segment. It's always been one of my favorite, and it's the one that started everything from the beginning.
He's dead. They're all dead. Everyone. You and I are in a dead world. And I'm glad it's dead. Cheap, honky-tonk of a world.
Coming up next is Workshop Wasteland. All right. Workshop Wasteland. And this is one of my fun. I had so many stories this week saved that I could not use them all. But I want to tell you, it was an absolute goldmine of popular culture, post-apocalyptic fiction, movies, the works. There was so much stuff out there. So we're going to do a broad strokes because we actually have a little more of it coming up at the end in the final segment. But here we go. So this one here, this is from The Guardian, I believe is a British newspaper. Generation Z, that's the name of this zombie show. Bear with me. I'm just going to read you just the summary of it, and it sounds really fun. I have not looked it up yet. The setup is an army van carrying some sort of toxin has crashed into an old folks' home, and the baby boomers inside transform into biters with a sudden taste for young flesh. 4 teenagers who all keep looking at their damn phones have to stop them. The army are there, but they ain't much use. There's also some parents, but they got their own thing going on. There are a lot of things Gen Z gets right. And I don't mean Gen Z, the people group. I mean Gen Z in this TV show, sorry. And this is a quick review from a professional reviewer. I'm just going to list a few. The initial toxic leak is done really well. It gets to the point. The show's gore is enjoyable, somewhere between cartoon splatter and absolute horror. The decision to make the zombies half conscious while they do it was a smart one. An actor named Robert Lindsay, I'm not quite sure who he is, said it's always a good idea to have him in there. And they said they stay away from a lot of their least favorite zombie tropes, which is a big thing. But most of all, Generation Z manages to make actual characters out of its teenagers. Holy shit. Anytime Becky and I sit down to watch a horror movie, or any movie for that matter, you've probably heard us say we're not a big fan of kid actors. And unfortunately, a lot of teenagers become cliches or flanderized, whatever. Hey, diddly doo. Anyway, so they become more like Ned Flanders. They're just a caricature of a character. How about that? But in this, it says they actually make characters out of the teenagers, which I don't think I've seen done yet. The concept of Gen Z is still very new. The eldest person in the generation is 27, and I'm not sure the writer and cultural interpreter has stepped forward yet. The youngest are 12, and previous attempts to characterize them have been really bad. Like Douglas is canceled. I haven't seen that, but yeah, they end up, Gen Z in movies and film end up being just like, they were the quote unquote punching bag, just like millennials were for a while. But this guy says this movie, I keep calling it the movie, this TV show about old people trying to eat young people. It's a little on the nose, but they said it was very enjoyable. So I'm going to have to look it up for Becky and I. Real quick, there we are. This comes from Deadline. Ralph Fiennes reveals 28 days later trilogy plot details. 2 movies have already been filmed. So the first one's coming out in 2025. It was filmed on an iPhone, but they actually filmed 2 movies back to back at the same time, which is rather exciting. 28 days later, resuming after nearly 2 decades, ahead of June 20th, 2025 premiere, the Oscar nominee revealed some new plot details. It's 3 films, of which 2 have been shot. Britain is 28 years into this terrible plague of infected people who are violent, rabid humans with a few pockets of uninfected communities. It centers on a young boy who wants to find a doctor to help his dying mother. So this is a very post-apocalypse. This is not like a during the apocalypse or a current apocalypse. This is something that happens 28 years later, and Britain's trying to regain some semblance of normality. I don't think so. All right, next. So I watched this trailer. Obviously, I can't share it with you. Earth Abides. Has anybody out there, if you've read Earth Abides, throw it into the comments. It is one of the few traditional end-of-the-world novels that I have not read. It stars the son from the Vikings TV show. The trailer makes it look pretty good. It's going to be an ongoing series, not just a limited series. So there's that. And holy crap, I don't know how this slid under the radar, guys, but I do have a piece of Stephen King news that is also post-apocalyptic, so it is totally pertinent to the Prepper Files. The end of the world as we know it. New tales of Stephen King's The Stand. You heard that right. Not written by Stephen King, but fully embraced and endorsed by the master of horror himself. Now, for the first time, Stephen King is fully authorized to return to the harrowing world of The Stand through the original short story anthology as presented by award-winning authors Christopher Golden and Brian Keene, bringing together some of today's greatest and visionary writers. Features terrifying and painfully human tales that will resonate with readers. Okay, so basically what is going to happen is Stephen King has given his blessing and carte blanche for these new authors to go in and write stories that take place in the world of The Stand. To say I'm cautiously optimistic would be an understatement. I'm absolutely excited. There are, I don't even know how many. I couldn't read them all to you, but about 30 names of authors who are going to write stories in this. Let's just say I'm excited. We'll go with that. So I believe that is one more. See, I told you there's so much this week in post-apocalyptic pop culture news. Post-apocalyptic film Year 10 trailer. It's just called Year 10, and it takes place 10 years after the collapse. It looks a little more, I don't know, a little bit like that Revolution show, maybe. I don't know. It's got that kind of like medieval look to it a little bit. I'm not sure it's going to be great. The poster doesn't do it any justice. You see a really vicious wolf on top of Year 10 and a dude with a bow and arrow pointing right at you. Could be okay. Again, it kind of looks like something that you're going to see on a Sunday afternoon on Amazon Prime after you've scrolled through 12 pages and haven't found something you want to watch. And they finally say, here's this $250,000 movie. Like it or lump it. I don't know. We'll see. But I had to share it with you either way. All right. Moving things up just a little bit. I mixed up the order this evening just because I could. I don't have a stinger transition for this yet, but we will. This one's going to be called the Prepper Files. And this is an on this date segment. And this is where I go back to November 7th, 1913. The first day of the Great Lakes Storm of 1913, a massive blizzard that ultimately killed 250 and caused over $5 million worth of damage. Now, in 1913, in 2013 dollars, that's 118 million. So in 2022 dollars, it's probably $500 million. It caused $118 million worth of damage, and winds reached hurricane force on this date. I've experienced hurricane force winds in the middle of a blizzard on at least 2 occasions. And that is a deadly combination, folks. And I cannot imagine what it was like for those people living over a century ago to have to deal with, a winter hurricane. Enough said. Anyway, How about this one here? 1957, Cold War, the Gaither Report calls for more American missiles in fallout shelters. An AI overview, because that's what I like to do with this stuff. It was called Deterrence and Survival in the Nuclear Age, and it was a report released in 1957. Now, I kind of dug into this a little bit, and even when I ever go back and keep working on the history of prepping, then I may end up including some of this, but it was kind of neat. The report talked about the Soviets They thought they'd have a dozen operational ballistic missiles within a year. It turned out that it wasn't true, at least at the time. The report presented two alarming scenarios for the U.S. the Soviet strike that destroyed the federal government and the nation's economy, and a Soviet destruction of all bases. Eisenhower thought, after being presented with the scenarios, Eisenhower concluded that there could be no winners in a general war. That sounds like war games, doesn't it? And that thermal nuclear weaponry could only be used to deter. So an open, active war involving nuclear weapons would never pan out. The report proposed, and this was the interesting part, the report proposed that fallout shelters be built not just for military personnel or government officials, but for civilians as well. The idea was that the U.S. government could facilitate and encourage the construction of shelters. Anyway, this was where the modern idea of everybody having their own backyard shelter. Before that, it was designed or thought that only the government would need shelters. And then they're like, hey, why don't we encourage the public to do the same thing? And so that's what they did. And this is where that started from. In 1957, that report stated, hey, everybody, get busy building shelters. Now, finally, this was the one I wanted to share with you. And this was a good one. It was kind of cool, but I did not realize this. 1994. Are you ready? Number one, who wants to feel a little bit old? Because 1994 was 30 years ago today. So 3 decades ago today, WXYC, not Z, the student radio station at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, launches the world's first internet radio broadcast. That, folks, I would say you could trail the history of workshop radio back 30 years ago. Whatever these guys started with made everything that came after it possible. You know, Joe Rogan interviewing Donald Trump and me sitting here sipping on an old-fashioned chatting to you about the history of prepping. Simple as that. 30 years ago today, it launched. How cool is that? All right, what do we got next for you guys? Well, sliding right in.
And you stay on the back roads, and you keep your gun handy. Our country is still full of thieving, murdering patriots.
Get ready for I Read It on the Internet. I read it on the internet. It's where we take a look at the front page of the internet. I don't know if they still call it that, but if you don't know what Reddit is, well, look it up, Reddit. And this week in Our Preppers, we take a look at the top story, what people shared, and I wanted to share this one. It's not a very long one, but if you happen to hear about the Spanish floods, it kind of caught my attention because they started a week to 10 days after Becky got back. It ended up not being where she was, but again, my mind went to, holy shit, could you imagine being there on a school trip and all of a sudden dealing with extravagant floods like that? So here it is. This comes from Martel L Fitness. My region has been reminded how a shit hit the fan situation can happen in a matter of hours and completely destroy cities and towns. My region just received a year's worth of rain in a single day, flooding entire towns within hours. So far, 200 people have lost their lives, though the final number will likely be much higher, and over 2,000 are reported missing. Shit. Entire towns now resemble war zones. One morning, you wake up, you have a normal life in a typical European country. 24 hours later, there's no internet, there's no food markets. Supermarkets have been completely looted. Thieves are running wild. There are literally bodies on the streets. Emergency services are overwhelmed, and you may have lost loved ones. Homes have been destroyed by rain that reached up to 4 meters. That's 12 feet, folks, in some areas. And you realize you can't rely on the government to save you. We often take things for granted, assuming we'll have time to prepare, or these terrible events we see on the news won't happen to us. This has been a wake-up call for many, but hundreds won't get a second chance. Stay alert, stay prepared, always. That's intense, folks. I mean, that sounds very similar to what, some of our brethren in Tennessee and the Carolinas dealt with recently, but it's scary. I think about that all the time, and maybe I shouldn't focus on the negative, but I often think, when a person has such a good life, shit can change like that. And all the more reason to do everything you want to do, to build the life you want to live, to enjoy life to the fullest, because shit like that can happen. I hope it doesn't. I hope nobody ever has to wake up one morning thinking, oh man, I got to pack my lunch for work again. And then ended up the day in the post-apocalyptic wasteland like that was in Spain. To me, no way, no how. Hardway Alaska says, working on a YouTube series myself where Earth loses all power and I'm on my own. In each episode, I'll teach bushcraft survival skills. I'll let you know when I get it up. It'll be a while. Dude, I think that's friggin' amazing. Do it. Share it with me. Make sure if you're not in Telegram, I don't know if you are, but share it. I'll pin the show in Telegram and we'll share it on social for you because I think that has a great hook. It's one of those situations where you're like, wow, what do I, people are going to be intrigued. Why did the Earth lose the power? But more than that, it's going to sound funny, but it kind of reminds me of that channel that the guy did recently. Well, a couple, 2-3 Christmases ago. And it was skills your dad never taught you. And he teaches kids how to tie ties, change their oil, rotate their tires. And that's for, kids whose dads died or kids whose dads just weren't around. But either way, he's finding a cool, interesting, stick in your brain way to teach practical skills. I love that hard way. Keep it up. I can't wait to hear it. I'm holding you to it. I expect you to get to me because I want to hear all about that. All right, here we go.
Nothing like eating under an open sky, even if it is radioactive.
Dropping the dime on precious metals. All right, here we go. It's been a few weeks since there's been anything interesting in the precious metals end of things. Doesn't mean that there isn't interesting things happening, but it's just been kind of more of the same, just kind of slow, steady growth, and then sell-offs and slow, steady growth. This one is kind of cool or different or scary or anyway. Russia in talks with BRICS. BRICS over precious metals exchange. Here we go. Russia is in talks with other BRICS members about creating an international precious metals exchange to ensure fair pricing and trade growth, the country's finance minister said in a statement on Thursday. Leaders of BRICS countries, which account for 37% of the global economy, gathered in the Russian city of Kazan this week to discuss initiatives aimed at creating alternatives to the Western-dominated financial and trade infrastructure. So as a moment, Russia, Iran, and I know there's a few others in there, 37% of the global economy runs through there. So all of a sudden they decide that they want to trade their portion of precious metals on their own market. All the power to them. Obviously, I can't stop them. But what's that going to do? Is that going to remove 1/3 of all the precious metals from the Western markets? Is it going to drive prices up? I don't know. I don't really have an idea yet. This is just one of those things that, BRICS continues to push. I mean, 37% is not that far off from 50% of the world's global economy. That blows me out of the water, guys. That's not some tiny island somewhere. And they have some serious pull. And if they decide they want to pull their precious metals out, not that that's what this is saying, but basically they're saying they want to have their own market to trade amongst themselves, which means some of that's going to come off of the North American Western market. So there you go. Lone Canadian says BRICS has already talked about creating their own currency partially backed by gold. Again, I don't hate it. I mean, that's what, a free economy, an open economy is all about. I mean, you can take it, you can leave it. Competition for the American dollar probably isn't a bad thing. I think we all agree that competition's good. What ends up happening, I don't know. I mean, I like seeing gold-backed currency, simple as that. To continue on this story from Reuters.com, the mechanism will include the creation of price indicators for metals, standards for the production and trade of bullion, and instruments for accrediting market participants, clearing and auditing within BRICS. The BRICS Precious Metal Exchange would rival Western trading platforms such as the London Metal Exchange and would protect trade from sanctions imposed by the West on BRICS members Russia and Iran. So again, they're looking to sidestep sanctions. I mean, if I were my own country, I'd probably be doing the same thing. Simple as that. All right, what do we have next, folks? Well, next we have This Week in the Workshop. And this is where I take a look at the shit I got done this week. And I got a lot done. I don't know if I actually recapped everything in here, but the main reason I do it is for accountability. So you can say, Tim, I don't think you got a lot done this week. Or just as important, hopefully inspiration. You can be like, hey, if that old bastard up in Canada can do that, I can probably do it too. Hey, either way, I got the latest battle box. I have 2 videos recorded of the last 2 battle boxes. They're going to end up on Patreon at the moment. It just seems to be the only place that I can put them, that it suits the content that I'm creating. You know, there may be some videos that go on the podcast channel eventually, but I'm trying to keep those very specific. So there may end up being a need for a 3rd channel someday. But either way, battle boxes was pretty good. I announced earlier this week, like I said, I'm going to beat this like a dead horse. You know what they say, you keep beating a dead horse, all you get is a bigger mess. But in the past, I have realized that when I announce things, I will announce, and folks will still come and say, holy shit, I didn't know that you were doing that. So I'm going to continue to announce it. But the podcast is splitting from this channel. If you tuned in after the first 5 minutes of this show, as of January 24th, that'll be the last episode that will be live on this channel here. There is the pinned comment this evening, if you're on YouTube, is the link to the Workshop Radio channel. I've had it for a couple of years. I haven't done a whole lot with it, but I finally spruced it up and got it ready. I have been simulstreaming there for almost 150 episodes. People didn't know this. I was just doing it. I kept holding myself back, and I'm a big fan of when you're ready to do it, pull the Band-Aid off, but I didn't do it this time. So anyway, it's going to be there. I announced that the Patch of the Month Club is coming to an end. You guys, for those patch members who are out there, this month you're going to get actually, they're in the mail. I sent them earlier this week. You'll get 3 patches. There'll be a letter in there telling you what's going on. And then there'll be 1 more package coming in December with 2 more patches plus a couple of surprises. Anybody who was a yearly subscriber, once the final group gets out and delivered, you'll get a refund for what was left on your yearly. Again, it is one of those things, folks, that I talk about. Do the things that bring you the biggest return. And I had to figure out a couple of more things that were going to go by the wayside. And I felt like the Patch of the Month Club had run its natural course. I loved it. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did it. And I'm also glad and not sad that it's coming to an end. I did a video this week on headlamps. Moderately well received, nowhere near as well as 3 other videos in the last month. I've had 3 videos that have done over 15,000 views in the first week, which is crazy. I don't know. Anyway, Martinson family says, good night, guys. Got a hammer, a Karen. Okay. I'd love to hear the rest of the story. But either way, this week's video on headlamps, check that out if you haven't. Halloween came and went. I hope you had a great spooky season. I know we did. I took Charlotte and her friend to a haunted house, which was very enjoyable. I released the interview with Joel Salatin on the regular channel. I think it'd been 3 or 4 months since it had been on the Patreon. So the stuff goes there for a couple of months and then it ends up here on the main channel. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's been really good. And if you didn't know, or if you didn't hear, what a crazy story. Jeff, if you're still in here, I got to thank Jeff for turning me on to this story today. Joel Salatin was pegged to be an agricultural advisor in one of the committees that's going to be advising someone who's advising Trump. What an interesting kind of scenario. So yeah, I took my son, Mac. I took him on a whirlwind trip down to Montana, back up to Edmonton. We went to a hockey game for his birthday. So happy birthday, buddy. You're 3 years away from the big 30. I tried a maple old fashioned, which, wow, was it ever good. 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of maple syrup. And if you think that sounds like too much maple syrup, it was not. So 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of maple syrup, 4 splashes of Angostura bitters, an orange peel, and about a 1/4 inch chunk of a cinnamon stick. I got it at a restaurant down in Lethbridge called Brickstone. It was so good, guys. Try that recipe at some point if you want to. And on our way back through, because I don't have a lot of close friends in this area. I've got a couple, and you guys know who you are. But I was on my way coming through a certain town in southern Alberta, and I met up with Mr. Dixon. Chris Dixon's not in here tonight, but it was great. Guys, if you ever think I need to take a chance and meet somebody that I've talked to on the internet like this, do it. Chris Dixon took that chance 2 or 3 years ago. And guys, we are so close now. I love it. I messaged him. I said, hey, I'm 90 minutes out of your town. Do you want to get together for coffee? And without one hesitation, he messaged back, yep. And he met me at Tim Hortons, and we sat there for half an hour, had lunch, and just chatted about everything. So it was good to see him. Spending time with a good friend is invigorating, folks. Also, we finished the drywall upstairs at the daycare. Yeah, baby. And guess what? Today, Curtis and I painted both coats. Man, I love the dry climate here because you can paint as fast as you can paint it, it dries. We painted both coats of the first classroom upstairs. One classroom down, 7 to go. We're shooting to get 2 done tomorrow. We pre-taped the second room this afternoon before we left. Wow. Anyway, so stoked. Why does getting shit done motivate and excite me so much? I guess it shouldn't excite everybody, but there is nothing in this world, well, very few things in this world I love more than just getting a bunch of work done, guys. I love it. How could you not, right? All right, next. And I need to get a stinger for this, but I don't have one yet for this transition yet. But I believe this segment, unless we come up with a better name, is going to be called Food for Thought. And why is that? Well, the main reason is because I haven't come up with a better name, but really it's a place where I can fit in some news articles or some random thoughts that I just haven't, I have no other spot to fit them. So unless you guys can come up with a better name for Food for Thought right now, that is where it's at. So here we go. Let's share. I got a couple of quick articles here. Honestly, I just wanted to share them with you because it was stuff I didn't know either. This one comes from GameRant.com, and we're going to hammer through this one. But it is the best post-apocalyptic horror movies. There's one in here that I'd barely even heard of before, and it was Screamers from '95 called War Never Changes. Haven't heard of it. If anybody's seen it, great, but I haven't. So we're just going to go right through this. And yeah, number 8, 10 Cloverfield Lane, one of my all-time favorite movies. Absolute masterclass of acting, tension, small space horror. It Comes at Night, 2017. I never think of that as post-apocalyptic, but I suppose it kind of is. If anybody's seen it, it was lambasted by the general public because it was mispromoted. That's the problem. Moving on. I Am Legend, love it. Oh, The Girl with All the Gifts, couldn't stand it. I'd heard so many great things about the book. Watched the movie. It was boring as death. Literally, I just didn't like it. Last Man on Earth, that was, I believe, the original version of what is I Am Legend. Bird Box, yeah, it's okay. Take it, leave it. 28 Days Later, absolute freaking classic. And number 1, A Quiet Place. I wouldn't agree with the order of this list, but a good list nonetheless. So there you go. There's 9 movies that if you haven't seen some of them, I love these lists. Just hammer through them. And if you guys want, take notes or pause it and write it down because I'm always looking for something. I've never seen Screamers and I'm not sure I'd ever even heard of it. All right, next, what do we got? Here we go. What's new in post-apocalyptic fiction? And again, these are not recommendations, just information for you. But I hadn't heard of these. This one's How to Fall in Love in a Time of Unnamable Disaster. That title alone inspires dread and fear. How about this one? Escape Velocity by Victor Manabo. Earth is on its way out. Earthlings are jockeying for a place on a new settlement to Mars. Sound interesting? How about Lost Ark? Lost Ark Dreaming. Ocean levels have risen across the globe, making much of the planet uninhabitable. Your Shadow Half. In this dystopian horror novella, a virus has swept the globe that causes people to go into a murderous rage. Sky Full of Elephants. The world is still grappling with the unexplained events of 1 year ago when all white people in America walked into their nearest bodies of water and drowned. Oh my. Okay. 0 stars. Do not recommend. Nope, that's not. That wasn't my recommendation for the book that came before. That's an actual title of a book. Dan and his girlfriend, Mara, are kicking back for a relaxing vacation at an island resort when, so annoyingly, the sun explodes. The resort descends into chaos with guests turning against each other and the CEO of a yoga pyramid scheme trying to take charge. Actually, that sounds kind of cool. I might have to check that one out. How about this one? She Who Knows. A brilliant writer of African futurist worlds that combine elements of dystopia, sci-fi, fantasy, and West African mythology. Okay, The Last Gifts of the Universe, space opera novella. You won't just see what happens after the apocalypse on Earth. You'll see what happens to an entire universe gone extinct. And finally, Private Rights. Do yourself a favor, do your future self a favor, and pre-order this apocalyptic literary novel from the author of Our Wives Under the Sea, futuristic retelling of Shakespeare's King Lear. There you go. Simple as that. I don't know. Interesting. At least one of those caught my attention. I would say let's see right here. Sky Full of Elephants. The world is still grappling with 0 stars. Do not recommend. I kind of recommend that. I love that. What an elevator pitch for a book. So that's the one I'm going to check out off this list. There you go. Simple as that. Lone Canadian says Screamers is great, but more sci-fi than post-apocalyptic. Maybe that's why it's never really made any of my lists, because it wasn't on other lists that I'd seen. All right, what do we got next? Here we go.
It's the apocalypse, end of days, the judgment day, the end of the world, my friend.
Let's dig into the community mailbag. Without saying, the community mailbag will, you should be able to figure out what that is. But really, it's where I take community feedback. And mostly, it's the absolute best of YouTube for the week. I have a virtual treasure trove of comment material that comes in on a weekly basis now. This one here was pretty cool. This comes from Simon Too Simple 67. What a great name. He said, in my semi-truck, it would beat the heck out of a 12-volt truck and recharge batteries on my little 400 inverter. I'm going to fill you in on that. This was a comment replied to my DeWalt battery coffee maker. Now, I talked about it being good for off-grid, working in a garage. What I had never once thought about was how great it would be for truck drivers and van campers and that sort of thing. So the next time I do a video on this product, I'm definitely going to include that. But I wanted to share that. And I'd never really thought about, I've seen people use DeWalt batteries to power little trolling motors on fishing boats, to light sheds and camps. But I never thought about how great they would be for semi-truck drivers. I'm always looking at the cool stuff at Love's Truck Stop, but in this instance, I think it'd be great. All right, Super Salty Dog 77. What a great name. Says, all right, this was a response to last week's podcast. So it says, during the whole time, wait, hang on, sorry. Let me go ahead a little bit. I'm going to skip that because I didn't particularly care for that part of the comment. Decades ago, when Fidel seized power from Batista, he relied heavily on the USSR. This is talking about the collapse of the Cuban electrical grid that we talked about last week. The communist doctrine became very friendly with Khrushchev. The Soviets had plenty of oil, just as they do today, and traded with Cuba using oil as currency. Cuba built the island's power infrastructure around this nearly free oil. All of their power generation relied on oil. Fast forward to today. USSR doesn't exist anymore. Russia funds their economy using expensive oil, which Cuba can no longer afford. Cuba does not have the revenue to modernize their power generation. And as long as Cuba clings to their ideology that the U.S. is their enemy, that communism's the best, they will not have resources to modernize. Russia is in no position to help, as they are using most of the revenue to fund their war with Ukraine. Little hope for Cuba until they drop the revolutionary hatred for capitalism in the U.S. I think that communism rewards loyalty, not productivity. I think that communism rewards loyalty, not productivity. Whew, that sounds very similar to some unions I've known. But either way, I'm just saying, I don't disagree with this at all. It was nice to get a little more background on the Cuban energy crisis. And they're not wrong. I know there's lovers of communism out there. I don't see how you ever could be, but there you go. Here we go. This one comes from Pappy Man 179. I don't know if this is old man Pappy or not, but either way, Pappy Cannoli. A jerry can is a very, okay. All right. I'm going to read this with intonation in my voice for each time something is capitalized or quoted. A jerry can is a very specific metal container, and you have none of them. Stop using Kleenex for cheap imitation snot rags. Stop using jerry can as if it means crappy plastic fuel container. Whew, I stepped on somebody's toes there, folks. You know what I love about the English language and language in general? It's relative. It's flexible. Things don't mean what they used to mean, and we have to continuously change definitions. And that's not on purpose. That's just the very nature of language. That's why you can look and see how much different British English is than, English over here. I don't know how, but here's the deal. I have called a jerry can since I was 5 years old. Everybody I know calls plastic gas cans jerry cans. Now, did they originally just mean the metal container? Yeah, they did. Do they now mean the overall broad stroke gas container? Yeah, they do. I don't know. I don't always get so worked up over things like that, but Pappy Man definitely was gerrymandering. No, I'm just sorry. What a bad. Anyway, there you go. Vance Joakim 8537 says, not clear if you can siphon fuel from a car tank into a gas can when you need fuel for something. Is the tube long enough? So they're asking about that little battery powered gas fuel transfer pump. No, that is not. But what showed up today, I think it's called a gas guzzler or something like that. I finally ordered one, and the design behind it is to allow you to get behind. There's a floating ball valve. I guess ball valve isn't the right term, but it's a floating ball that acts as a check valve, so that if your vehicle ever flips over in an accident, the ball drops into the gas cap and doesn't allow fuel to get out. And an added bonus to that is it makes it very difficult for crackheads to siphon your gas and then sell it for pennies on the dollar. The bad side to that is in a grid down situation, or just in a practical, I need to get gas out of a fuel tank situation, it makes it really almost impossible to siphon gas out of modern vehicles. So I found this kit that takes kind of a rigid 1/4-inch tube, and you turn it, and it's almost like the process of it reminds me of when you used to be able to get those things down in the windows and pop locks. Anyway, you go down, you turn it, it bypasses that floating ball, and then you put a rubber hose of about an 1/8-inch diameter down in it. Is it ideal? No, but it allows you to bypass that valve without doing any damage to your vehicle, and it runs off 12-volt power. I'm pretty excited about testing it out. Can't wait to. It's going to make for a hell of a good video. Now, L2 Survive, I have a comment from you. If you're still in here, I appreciate this one quite a bit. Now, when I'm making review videos, I quite often will make offhand comments, and I'll be like, I don't really mean that, but it's funny enough, and it might cause a little bit of controversy. So I'm going to leave it in there. So last week I did a video, and in the end, I had a few extra items from Costco that I told folks that I would show them. And one of them was this really cool rechargeable hand warmer from Zippo. I got from Costco. It was originally recommended to me from Ryan Buford, Prepper Dad. And hey, there he is. Good. So here's his comment. And I appreciate this because actually it made me rethink what I'd said. So he said, I use the neck lanyard for years. It keeps the hand warmer at chest level. When you put your jacket on over it, your jacket keeps all the heat inside. That is so friggin' perfect. So I made a throwaway comment in my video that basically said, I'm going to throw away that neck lanyard because I get flashlights all the time that come with wrist lanyards. I never use them. I tend to take belt clips off of knives. I'm just one of those guys that doesn't use things like that. Well, I'm definitely going to try this out, and I appreciate it. I didn't throw out the neck lanyard for what it's worth, but I love the idea. Again, I talk about this all the time, and sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees, but I talk about if you need to keep yourself warm in a really bad situation and you can't heat your entire apartment, heat a room, heat a tent, heat yourself, keep yourself warm. And what a great example of doing this exact thing, putting that hand warmer around your neck, inside your layers of clothes, and allow your layers of clothes to work as an insulator. Love it. Thank you for sharing that, man. I absolutely loved it. So beyond that, folks, I believe that is all we have for this week in prepping. I love coming on. I love doing these episodes. They make me smile. They are the highlight of my week. It's a great time to come, drink a little bit of an old-fashioned, hang out with some awesome delinquents, share the good, the bad, and the ugly of the week. And yeah, it's kind of our mile marker along the road. We're like, hey, let's check in. Let's see, how are we doing? How's everybody doing? Everybody getting all the shit done you want to get done. So again, don't forget, this show, it's not going anywhere per se. It's not going to change its form factor at all, but it isn't going to be on this channel as of, episode 501. It's going to be over on @Workshop Radio on YouTube. The link is pinned here tonight, and I'm going to spam that out to you for the next 3 months to make sure that everybody doesn't miss it. Because if I'm going to live by what I preach, then I have to do what I preach. And that is simply, if you want to have the best damn YouTube channel you can have and you want to have, then you have to niche it down. If you try to do everything, it turns into nothing. And so I've done two things that are incredible here, this podcast and the review videos, but they have to have their separate channels. And so it's happening. I'm going to, like I said, give everybody heads up. toward it. So what's everybody got coming up for this week? For me, what do I got left? Well, another early morning tomorrow. My son-in-law and I are going to go up and we're going to knock out 2 more rooms. Well, at least that's the plan, of paint up at the daycare. I am stoked. We have got so much shit done. I can't wait. I'm going to have a great weekend with the wife and the kids. We are going to pull out the Christmas decorations. Yep, I know. We've already had Thanksgiving up here. So that's going to be a good time. And I'm going to try to watch a movie. We have Strange Darling to watch. If you haven't seen it or heard of it, Google it, see what you think. But it's got Kyle Gallner in it, who is a guy that I've really appreciated his work as of late, and it comes highly recommended from folks I respect. So let's see. Other than that, I'm just going to keep getting shit done. I'm going to keep putting out the absolute best content I can for you guys. If you have suggestions, here's the other thing I want to let you know. Chris Dixon, my good buddy, he knows that I thrive on quality, and I want this show every single week. I listen to, almost every week, I listen to my audio podcast and I say, how can I make this better? I looked at the show last week and I said, how can I make it better? So I incorporated a teleprompter, which I already use for my review videos. I said, you know what? I don't like the level of the camera. So I moved that around. So that is a little bit better. Chris messages me and he goes, did you know that at the very end of the show, your outro cuts the last few seconds of your show off? And I said, I did not know that. The only way for me to know some of these things, if there's something out there that you think could be better on this show, dude, I'm almost 500 episodes in. And if I can't learn from other folks, I got a problem. So if there's something you think, hey, this could be improved, let me know. I'll do it for you if I think it's worth it. So there you go. I still haven't maybe figured out whether it cuts off the end or not, but StreamYard's added this new feature that auto intros and outros for me. So that helps a lot. So with that, folks, it's great to see you. If you're not part of the Telegram group, grab the link from tonight and come and join us, because that's where all the cool kids hang out. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.